The president was asked if that was a difficult decision.
No, it wasn't. To me, it was absolutely clear. Absolutely clear. We went for two reasons. We ran bin Laden and a safe haven. From the very beginning, if you may recall, I never thought we were there to somehow unify Afghanistan. It's never been done.
More than 2,300 Americans made the ultimate sacrifice serving in Afghanistan. The Inspector General for the U.S. Capitol Police will testify to a congressional committee Thursday about the agency's broad failures during the January 6th riot at the Capitol, including missed intelligence and outdated weapons that officers didn't feel comfortable using. The Justice Department has decided against charging the Capitol police officer who fatally shot a protester inside the building. By the beginning of next month, all U.S. airlines will be selling the middle seats on flights again. Federal health officials not so sure that's a good idea.
As of May 1st, no U.S. airlines will keep middle seats open anymore. Delta, scheduled to be the last to end the pandemic spacing, which was aimed at making passengers feel more safe. The researchers now say that when middle seats are vacant, it can reduce exposure to viable virus particles by more than half, anywhere from 23% to 57%. The study from the CDC and Kansas State University says physical distancing of airline passengers can provide additional reductions in risk for coronavirus exposure, and the study didn't even include masks, which are now required on planes. The trade group Airlines for America emphasizing that other safety measures continue, including intensified cleaning and hospital-grade ventilation systems. Lisa Brady, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Nicholas. If you are a small business, you may be interested in a federal program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This program can provide federal funds to match equity investments into your company or help you get lower interest rates at local banks. To find out more on how this program can help your small business, please contact your Guam Congressional Office at 475-6453 or at michael.sanicolas@mail.house.gov.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the Office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
76 Circle K, the Subaki Tower, and Spa Ayalam bring you another staycation. We are celebrating Mom and all she does. Win a 2-night stay at the luxurious Subaki Tower, get pampered by Spa Ayalam, and enjoy a delicious lunch and dinner at Casa Oceano. All you have to do is purchase $35 or more in 76 fuel and enter to win a staycation fit for a mom. The more you gas, the more chances of winning. Visit 76CircleKGuam.com or any Circle K location for more information.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services. Sunday brunch at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro is back. Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. $28.95 for adults and $14.95 for kids 5 to 11 years old. Call 479-2652 or 2653 for reservations.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
So, well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week. Let's go straight to Zemi Ikotny. Every once in a while, if you live long enough, you'll see something that you thought you'd never, ever see. One of the terms that's used to describe such a phenomenon is a black swan. Everybody knows what a swan looks like, a beautiful, graceful white bird with a long neck. But at least in theory, there exists such a thing as a swan whose color is black. You know, I know somebody out there in the audience is chuckling and saying, yeah, Bob, black swans matter. But it looks like we have a black swan today in the Daily News. The Daily News actually wrote an editorial that is not hard left, like something they copied from the Gannett News Service. So just when you think you've seen everything, you're in for a surprise. And here's how it goes. Replace BPT with sales tax. The debate or the deduction of elimination, I think they mean or elimination, or maybe not, the debate over the reduction of the elimination of the business privilege tax shouldn't be a debate at all. The BPT, known in the past as the gross receipts tax, needs to be removed and replaced with a sales tax. The government can then debate how much of a sales tax it will levy on the community. First, the BPT is a hidden tax. A hidden anything in government is bad. Yeah, I'll go along with that. Second, the BPT increase was supposed to be a temporary fix when the proposal was raised in 2018 in response to potential federal tax cuts. As so many things on Guam that start out as, quote, temporary, the rate increases roots are growing deeper by the year as the legislature and the administration continue to extend the rate. Third, the BPT does not allow us to capture any revenue on goods that are ordered online and mailed to Guam, which means the government on its own has decided to ignore a significant income source. By doing so, the government is happy to continue to burden its local businesses with the tax. The government is concerned about reduced revenues. If the government is concerned about reduced revenues, remove the BPT tax and introduce a sales tax system which is transparent. The BPT is a hidden tax for both businesses and the government. The government hides behind the BPT to tax the community without taking accountability for its taxation. A sales tax is transparent. It is at the front of a consumer's bill. It also requires the government to justify to its people why the tax needs to exist. With a sales tax, the government will be allowed to capture revenue from online purchases, which we know have increased exponentially on this island over the last decade, let alone this last year during this time of Wuhan virus. The entire debate on rolling back the tax for specific types of business is a waste of time. It's a potential ploy trying to appease small businesses by rolling back the BPT a percentage. With a sales tax, you wouldn't even need to do that. Everyone is treated equally. There's parity. Businesses already pay to do business here. They pay corporate tax, licensing fees, permitting fees, custom fees, and taxes. The BPT has no real purpose besides levying an across-the-board tax on businesses without any justification besides the government needing to find a tax course that doesn't affect re-election. The island can't afford more complicated tax structures. We're a small island. We need businesses. They employ our people. They contribute to the well-being of our island. They fill the government coffers. One would think it would be the island's advantage to develop a way to entice businesses to open here. A hidden tax and a political agenda do not do that. Okay. Boy, I guess they got here just in time. You know, I guess Kaleo got here just in time. This is a real editorial. just some explanations here. Sales tax. If you've been to many of the mainland jurisdictions, you know how it works. You go to a store, and you want to buy You want to buy a six-pack and the price of the six-pack is $5. You present the six-pack at the counter, at the cashier, and the counter says, the cashier says, that will be $5.25. And you react in shock and you say, I thought you said it was $5. It is, but there's a 5% sales tax. So that's where the 25 cents comes from. So the sales tax goes from the buyer's pocket into the cash register, and it goes straight to the government. Not, not as if by magic, but, with the filing of the necessary returns, etc. Now, with a gross receipts tax, you take that $5 six-pack to the counter, you lay a $5 bill on the counter, and the cashier, we would hope, says, thank you very much. Not going to put it in a bag for you anymore. You take your six-pack, and away you go. Now, we have a 5% GRT on the six-pack on a $5 purchase, but you're not going to see that at the cash register because it's a gross receipts tax. 5% of that merchant's gross, whatever his gross income is, his gross revenue, he must pay a 5% tax to the government. Now, it doesn't matter if he's had a really bad month or day or year and his gross receipts tax are $5,000, but his expenses happen to be $6,000. He still owes 5% of $5,000, which is, how much, Jose? $250. Doesn't matter whether he's profitable or not, he has to pay that gross receipts tax. That's why it's called a gross receipts tax, until we thought we'd fancy it up a little bit and call it a business privilege tax. So the sales tax, the point of taxation is at the sale. The gross receipts tax, the point of taxation is at the revenue accumulation of a merchant. So the gross receipts tax encourages certain inefficiencies in business, especially when we've got this Dave Santos mechanism in place where there's a lower rate of gross receipts. I think they dropped it to 3% for businesses whose gross revenue is under $500,000. This would encourage a person to set up, instead of one store, to set up 4 stores, or at least 4 different sets of books to take advantage of that low tax rate. It's not a good system. With the sales tax, with the gross receipts tax, when it went from 4% to 5%, unless you're a fiscal hawk like me and read the papers and jabber on the radio all of the time, you might not have even noticed it. I think a lot of people don't notice it if it's not in the headline of the newspaper. The price increase would be rather small, so they just don't notice it. With a sales tax, if the sales tax goes up on the first day of the month, you're going to notice it on the first day of the month. And, of course, the quicker people notice it, the more reluctant politicians are going to be to raise it. And the editorial also talks about taxing sales from off-island. Now, up until very recently, the law was that you couldn't levy tax on someone who was not doing business in your jurisdiction. If Amazon was doing business in Atlanta and shipping their goods here but didn't have a presence in Guam, the old black letter law, International Shoe versus Washington, you couldn't tax that sale here. But that's been changed by the Supreme Court. So now Amazon can collect the sales tax. I'm not quite clear if Amazon must collect the sales tax, can collect it on sales for Guam and remit it to the government of Guam. Now, I'm always a little skittish when we start talking about this because my fear is this, that some companies won't ship to Guam because they don't think it's worth it. They examine the market. They think, it's a small market. We're not going to make many sales there. We got to fill out that nasty customs form. There are extra costs involved. Now, if we got to fill out another form for tax, we won't put that on our drop-down menu. We just won't sell to Guam anymore. So that's my fear. But I suspect that there are some geniuses in the government of Guam somewhere who have worked through this and would know if my fears are well-founded or not. From strictly from the standpoint of the retailer, he's saying, if Amazon and these other companies won't ship here because we got a sales tax, and they're going to have to collect it and remit it, good, because that lowers the competition from on-island merchants. Now, whenever sales tax has been discussed before, and it's been discussed a million times, and one of the monkey wrenches in the works is always our duty-free status. And if a sales tax bill is introduced, you can bet the folks down on the beach are going to come in and say, you know, we promote Guam as a duty-free destination. No customs duties, no sales tax, etc. Tourists think this is a bargain, and this is one of the attractions we have. We've got sun, sand, and duty-free shopping. And duty-free shopping over the years has been extremely profitable. And the companies engaged in duty-free shopping, you can bet, have paid BULA income tax, corporate income tax into the coffer. So that's not something to be quickly dismissed. That's something that requires a certain amount of debate as to whether or not we would be shooting ourselves in the foot by junking our gross receipts tax and going to a sales tax. All hard questions. I dropped my blue pencil.
Even the pencil is a little surprised.
Even the pencil's a little surprised by what the Daily News did. So these are all hard questions. They're extremely important questions. They're the kind of questions that our legislature should be dealing with instead of trying to figure out, should we change the name of Cocos Island to Cocoa Island? And these weighty subjects that they've been wrestling with since they were sworn in this time around.
Can I ask a question just to
Certainly.
clarify something?
Yeah.
Now, this op-ed talks about converting the business privilege tax or the gross receipt tax into a sales tax that's directly on each item that's purchased. However, all taxes that are collected by the business come from the consumer, I'm assuming, right?
Well, Ray will tell you that his father always told him that businesses don't pay taxes, they collect taxes.
Exactly. So This leads me into a question of what was the problem with the AG and GTA a couple of weeks back, where GTA is itemizing the business privilege tax on their bills?
Well, because the business privilege tax is not an item of that sale. If you're buying $20 worth of telephone services, you're not buying, I can't do the math fast enough, but you're not buying $19.80 worth of telephone service and 20 cents worth of tax. You're buying telephone service because the tax falls on the business on that gross receipts. So I heard Kelly talking about that, saying that the FCC says, well, you can itemize. Well, that wouldn't be itemization any more than the Medicare tax that the company pays. Let's say we're dealing with a solo. Let's say that GTA is a solo, sole proprietor. Let's say that I'm in the business. I wouldn't be able to send out a bill that shows how much of that bill I'm going to allocate to my Medicare tax or my FICA or anything like that. That's a tax that's internal to the company. It's not an item of the sale.
So could they apply it as a flat fee?
No.
Not even that.
No. And that's
interesting.
Yeah, and that was the flap that arose. Once upon a time, Ben Pangilinan got a law enacted called the Visible GRT Act that allowed merchants to actually display what the tax would be if it were applied to that sale. But it caused a whole lot more confusion than the prior system, so that's not around anymore. But with a sales tax, the sales tax is not an item of the purchase. It's a tax on the transaction. Big difference. So back to Jemmy Cotney. Very well done here in Daily News. You did exactly what editorials are supposed to do. You grabbed a hold of an important issue. You fleshed out the issues. You gave us some factual background. And you had a call to action. Exactly what an editorial is supposed to do. It gave a talk show host something to talk about other than some of the feel-good language that is passed for editorials before, or even worse from the Daily News, some of the left-wing propaganda, anti-Trump type of tripe that the left back in the D.C. area seems to thrive on. Okay, then we turn to the Post, and the Post says mandatory trash service is a big step in the right direction to end illegal dumping. I don't know if I'm going to buy that or not. With more and more trash piling up in the island's beaches, parks, jungles, around water wells, near rivers and streams, and sometimes right by the roads, news that Governor Leon Guerrero wants to make trash collection services mandatory for all residences is welcome. Now, another Joe may be protesting this. He called yesterday, and he doesn't know if that's constitutional or not. Consider what Director Vince Areola of the Department of Public Works stated during Tuesday's island-wide beautification task force meeting. Solid Waste has mentioned if only 50% of the households had pickups, that's a bad number, because where does the other 50% go to? Many people who have volunteered their mornings or afternoons picking up trash that's illegally dumped will tell you where that other 50% goes. According to Guam Solid Waste Authority website, each week the agency collects curbside trash from approximately 16,000 customers who have the 95-gallon wheeled cart. The agency operates transfer stations to serve those who do not pay for curbside collection. By comparison, the Waterworks Authority served an average 42,538 water customers in fiscal 2019. So we're talking 16,000 versus 42,500. Even if we were to assume that only 1,000 homes on island didn't have any services and couldn't afford or had no means to bring their trash to the transfer stations, that's potentially 95,000 gallons of trash going into our jungles, parks, beaches every week. An important issue is how mandatory trash services would be billed. The governor said she's been working with GSWA and the Guam Environmental Protection Agency to ensure there's a billing system so the GSWA gets the funds it needs to provide services. And in other articles I've seen mentioned, the governor mentioned that the trash collection bill would be part of the water bill, which is a really good idea. Almost everybody has water. And I've had some personal experience with that. If you lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on your water bill, there is a notation of how much you're paying for trash collection, whether you want it or not. And, of course, they do pick up the trash. And the city runs the water system there, just like our government runs the water system here. And if you don't pay your water bill, including your trash bill, the water company can file some papers, and that bill becomes a lien against your property. If there's a lien on your property, it becomes much more difficult to sell. And if there's a lien on your property, there's a provision in the law called the foreclosure of liens. So that property could be auctioned off to satisfy that lien. So that seems like a pretty foolproof way of collecting for trash collection. You can bet that a lot of people are not going to like it. Why should I have to pay for trash collection, et cetera, et cetera? Why is it on my water bill? All I want is, I don't want to pay for sewer. I don't want to pay for trash. All I want to pay for is water. And if you keep doing this, I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to go down to Best Water and Ice. I'm going to buy my water down there, and that'll show you guys. Okay, the governor said, as you were, yeah, the governor said there are some details they're ironing out, but the mandatory trash service is the direction they're working toward. The governor also said she doesn't want the cost of services, which are about $30 a month, to increase. That's good news to those who've lost jobs or lost working hours and are dependent on unemployment benefits. Details will be shared once those items are addressed, the governor said. While many in the community have hearts big enough to prioritize keeping our island environmentally healthy and safe, they should have mentioned Peggy Denny's name here. There are other areas that would benefit from our collective effort, particularly as we face a time when unemployment is an all-time high and our economy is still in the Wuhan virus slump. Certainly, the governor's plan alone won't rid the island of illegal dumping. There are other issues to be discussed and evaluating. Educating people and companies is an important aspect. Just recently, a video of a man throwing trash into the jungle went viral, and Guam EPA was able to track down the owner of the vehicle in the video, fine him $200, and force him to clean up the area. Here's what you need to do, Guam Daily Post. You need to put the guy's name in the paper. That's
slaughter.
Yeah, that's how people get educated. It's, you know, these are not popular concepts, but they've been around for a long time and they work. One way of modifying behavior is embarrassment and shame. So if people think, I'm not going to do this, the way the world works now, everybody's got a camera. I don't want a picture of me floating around all over the island. I'd be too embarrassed. I'd be too ashamed. So you should have put this guy's name in your editorial here. But another area is a shortfall within the EPA Solid Waste Division that tracks and cites illegal dumpers. With only 4 people on the team, they could certainly use some help. Perhaps there are other areas within the agency or within GovGuam there are more people than necessary who could be trained to help. Glenn St. Nicholas got his name in there. IBTF members also discussed increasing fees to as much as $500 for the first citation. They're even talking of forcing residents who are caught illegally dumping to perform community service, specifically picking up trash by the roadside every weekend for 6 months while wearing an orange jumpsuit. Yeah. You're thinking, yeah. And even if illegal dumping stops, we have to consider the destination of all that trash and the capacity of our landfill to accommodate even more trash than it's currently getting. This is all the more reason to reduce the amount of trash we generate, not to mention beginning now to plan for the expansion of the landfill. And every time this comes up, I think it's important to mention waste to energy, which has been something we've been fighting about for at least 35 years. If Ken's listening, he may call us and tell us about his part of the battle. It got off to a horrible start. It got tangled up with Wagdy Gurgis and with Carl Gutierrez, and it got to be so politicized between Carl Gutierrez and Ben Pangilinan, may he rest in peace, that you could have had the greatest, well, even that won't work anymore. I was going to say you could have had the greatest scientist in the world come out and say that it was totally safe. But the scientists have taken such a beating here, thanks to Dr. Fauci, that having a scientist speak up in your behalf tends to lower your credibility, not enhance it. But it got so politicized that the waste energy didn't have a chance of going forward. And maybe the only way to get to where we want to go is to clear the books and start from scratch, because it's costing us an awful lot of money to give all of our trash a state funeral down there in Ladzone. Okay, the editorial, the only thing I kind of criticize the editorial for here is lack of brevity. Tried to do too much in one editorial. But a pretty good editorial. So I've got my blue pencil here. This is the first time I've actually had to make a judgment as to the better of the two editorials in such a long time. I wonder if my blue star can even remember. But before I do that, I'm going to go to the green room to see if the green room anybody in the green room wants to talk about the blue star. But when I go to my call board here, there's nothing there.
It's blank?
It's blank.
We have Greg on the line.
Yeah,
he wants to talk about gross receipts tax and invoicing from companies.
Okay, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to issue the blue star right after the seventh inning, after the next break, and then I will take on Greg. And I don't know what happened to my stack. I didn't break it, Jose, really.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumont. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, here we are back again. We've got Greg who wants to talk about gross receipts tax. Go ahead, Greg.
Hey, Bob, how are you today?
I couldn't be better.
God, it's great. I'm glad to hear you. Hey, what we do in the business industry, okay, if I'm going to bill a guy $20,000, I say $20,000 plus the 5% GRT, so it's separated out on the invoice. So I only pay corporate taxes on the invoice, not plus the 5%. Otherwise, I got to pay corporate taxes on the GRT as well.
And that's one of the objections to the idea of a gross receipts tax. I'm not your tax attorney, and I don't want to give you tax advice.
No, we have to separate it out. Otherwise,
Greg, I'm not Greg. I'm not your tax attorney, and I'm not your lawyer. So whatever you're doing, okay. But I can tell you this: the gross receipts tax is a tax on your gross proceeds. So. One of the objections to it is that if you have $1,000 worth of revenue and you're paying a 5% grocery state tax on that, when you pay your income tax, you're paying your income tax on your profit, right? And some of that.
No, you're paying on the gross.
Your income tax?
Well, no, income tax is on your net.
Yeah, yeah.
But GRT is based on your gross.
On your gross, exactly.
And GRT is not considered in my gross.
Well, that's where I think probably we need to terminate this conversation because I'm not your tax attorney.
I'm not asking. I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I separate it out.
Oh.
This is my bill. This is a GRT, and then I pay GRT on the base invoice and not an additional percentage on the GRT. But that's just I've been doing this for 25 years.
Well, so be it.
I'm not paying GRT on GRT.
Well, and again, that's the objection to GRT, because if you really wanted to cover, you'd have to figure out what 5% of 5% is, and people have even gotten into that.
0.083 or something like that.
Yeah, 0.035 or something. But anyhow, that can
get ugly.
That's the objection to gross receipts tax. Anyhow, so I've told you what my ruling is, Greg, and good luck to you. Thanks for calling.
Yes, sir. Hey, and I appreciate your talk on the garbage too.
Okay, we'll talk trash anytime on Tall Tales, right?
Yeah, I can talk trash.
Thank you. All right, there's Greg. Okay, so the Post had a credible editorial, no question about it. Only criticism I have is they tried to cover too much ground in one editorial. They could have stopped. I think they could have stopped with the comparison of how much water is sold and how much trash is actually collected, and not gone on into education and some of these other things. They just tried to cover too many bases. Unlike the Daily News, which for almost a whole year didn't cover any of the bases. So I can't be too critical of the Post. The Daily News, on the other hand, is a page and a half of well-chosen words. It makes its point. It raises an issue that really needs to be discussed. It lays out the facts underlying that issue. It's got a punchline. It's got a call to action. It's exactly what an editorial ought to be. So after a long, long drought, let's have that drum roll. There'll be hangovers in the editorial boardroom of the Daily News tomorrow. You can bet on that, because the editorial board is going to be out celebrating tonight. Hey, we finally got a blue star, they're going to be saying. Okay, so I ought to go straight to the card from here. I've got, I thought I had a caller, but no caller. Okay, so let's go to the card. I'll take a look at my program notes. Of course, we've got Steve. And, you know, probably you guys know, you people out there in the international radio listening audience, all you tailgaters probably know more about Steve than he does about himself. About Jeep throat and the fact that he doesn't have jurisdiction at the court and all the rest of that stuff. So he's a permanent fixture on the court. Tom Shea and Mariana Leon Guerrero haven't come forward to face up to the latest BLM scandal, and BLM sinks deeper and deeper in scandal today. And then we've got a bout between a couple of heavyweights here. Frank Blas versus Mike San Nicolas. A long time ago, probably none of you radio listening audience would remember this, but back when boxing was big on Guam, back in the late 50s and the early 60s, when there was a boxing arena down in Assen, there was a very well-known Guam boxer named Kid San Nicolas. So I guess I would bill this as Kid San Nicolas versus Blaster Bloss. And then BLM is back in action in Minnesota, and I'm going to give you an analysis of what's going on with former police officer Potter in Minnesota and the latest set of riots. And then former Assistant Attorney General Dave Highsmith was sentenced yesterday. However, Josh hasn't ruled. He pled, and Josh has not ruled on the sentence yet. So the story isn't complete, but I'm going to talk about it anyhow. And then LifeSite News sets the abortion record straight on mail order abortions. And I'm probably going to spend some more time on Julian Uggan because the Protegi Latexan has written a letter to the Lieutenant Governor asking for a sit-down. This is really important stuff, and the story had a copy of Protegi Latexan's letter, which I have, and Protegi Latexan's letter said that it incorporated the letter from Julian Uggan to the reporters. So I'll be very anxious to see just exactly what Julian Uggan said. I'll be getting off of Sunshine on that tomorrow. So first item on the card. Okay. First item on the card is Bloss versus San Nicolas. But before I go to Bloss versus San Nicolas, I've got a caller on line 2. And because my stack doesn't work, I don't know who the caller is.
Mr. Cazendo is on the line.
Mr. Cazendo. All right. Good afternoon, Cazendo.
Hey, Judge Bob, how are you?
I'm doing great, Caz.
I wanted to give you and your audience a Tall Tales update on Patrick. He got out of surgery yesterday, and he's already walking out and about, so he's a little groggy, a little pain here and there, but he's doing fine. They were able to remove the cancer.
Well, that's good news, Kaz. I'm really glad you called to tell us that. We got some pictures from Patrick yesterday. We knew he was out of surgery, but it's good news that sounds like the surgery was a success, right?
Yeah, that's right. And he was in good spirits today, and we were kind of sharing some jokes that I can't put on the air, but it was good to hear him chuckle finally and have a good laugh at himself. And
well, if he's chuckling, you can share this with him. You can say that when you mentioned to me on the air that Patrick's okay, but he's a little groggy, that yeah. I said Patrick's always a little groggy. And then the horn honked twice, right? Yeah, for those who don't know, Patrick Palomo is the greatest piano player, greatest musician probably we've ever seen and probably ever will see. And he's had some health problems, and he's in California for surgery, and his buddy Cazendo just gave us an update. So good news. Thank you, Kaz.
Yeah, and one more thing. You were talking about boxing, local boxing, and I was just wondering if you remember a fellow named Charlie Freitas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was my father-in-law. Yeah.
Charlie was about my age, I think. You'd be in his 80s if he were still alive, right?
That's right, yeah. It's my former father-in-law, and he had some great stories back in the days.
Yeah, he
all
was...
the way about chasing Joe Murphy up a tree.
He was a very... I think if you were around during the time Charlie was in his prime, if you didn't know him, you darn sure knew who he was.
That's right, yeah. So just wanted to shout out for Charlie. Rest in peace for him, and also to update your audience with Pat Palomo. So good day, Judge.
Thank you very much, Cuz. All right. So we broke through the calendar there for a little important information. And let's see, where was I with the calendar? I've dispensed with Steve. Steve has not distinguished himself today. We still got one more day in the week. And then I've got Bloss versus San Nicolas. And I've got an article in the Daily News and one from the Post. The Post is the second article. St. Nicholas and Blas argue over aid for small businesses. Delegate says Senator made ignorant comment. Senator says small businesses felt betrayed. Delegate Michael St. Nicholas said Senator Frank Blas Jr. made a very ignorant statement. Yeah. When he commented that Northern Mariana Islands wasn't asleep at the wheel regarding economic injury disaster loan program limitations, how economic injury disaster loan program limitations were applied to those islands. Now, you got to go back to the Daily News story to pick up that statement. Some Guam businesses might be shut out of a federal pandemic grant, which gives a $10,000 in assistance because they were in the wrong place on a federal map, according to Senator Frank Blas Jr. Blas this week sent a letter to Mike St. Nicholas asking for more information about the Small Business Administration's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Targeted Advance and Business Loan Program. That's going to take a whole email just to name the program. Blas said business grants were provided on Guam during earlier rounds of federal pandemic relief, but the latest round now requires eligible businesses to be located in, quote, low-income areas, according to a map based on 2010 census data. According to the eligibility map, the central villages of Asan Maina, Pidi, Stanatya, Agana Heights do not qualify as low income, with poverty rates below 20%. The capital village of Hagatnya is considered low income with a poverty rate of 32.24%. The map states Agate is the village with the highest poverty rate of 33.9%. Agate. Now, I wonder if they're including all of Agate, or, just downtown Agate, which is also known as Agate Bloodtown, or some of the ritzier areas like Johnson Beach, for example. Can't tell. The lowest poverty rate on non-military land is in Tamuning at 13%. The part of Tamuning around Guam Premier outlets bordered by Farrenhold, where there are a lot of apartment buildings, is considered low income, according to the map. Now, here's a quote from Senator Frank Blas Jr. My initial reaction to the utilization of a map to determine eligibility was that it was unnecessary because all the businesses on Guam experience undue hardship. But when I viewed the map and saw there were eligible and ineligible areas the words that I can use to describe it are nonsense and discriminatory. Discriminatory is such a popular, that's discriminatory. You can't do that. Yeah, that's discriminatory. Blas stated in his letter to St. Nicholas, how can you say that only businesses in Tamuning and Hotel Row were adversely affected by the pandemic, or that Barragata Heights is a low-income community? How is it fair that businesses on the same side of the street as Guam Premier outlets are eligible for the grant, yet across the street at KFC, they're not? Maybe I don't have the next page of this article. I guess I don't have it. But Blas went on to say that all of the CNMI, Saipan, Luta, and Tinian, were all eligible, and there wasn't a map dividing them up into smaller pieces. And Blas's comment on that was, this just shows me that Khalili wasn't asleep at the wheel. And that's what kind of got St. Nicholas's back up. So I've got a picture of the map here. If you didn't see it, it was online. And the yellow areas are the eligible areas. The brown area or the purple areas are the not eligible areas. So going back to the Post, So Delegate San Nicolas said Blas made a very ignorant statement when he commented that the Northern Mariana Islands, meaning Kilile-Sablan, wasn't asleep at the wheel regarding how economic injury disaster loan program limitations were applied to those islands. Okay, let's take a short break and we'll come back to Saipan, Tinian, and Zanluta.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail kadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
So anyhow, they came out, and as they stepped in the ring, just after they touched gloves, Frank Blas, he didn't even horse around with a left jab or two. He just threw a right uppercut. Right, that was the first punch he threw. San Nicolas is a pretty good boxer, so San Nicolas was able to block that punch. And now he's come back showing good footwork with a jab here, a jab there, a right cross here, a right cross there.
Would you say he chipped in?
He what?
Chipped in.
Chipped in, yeah. So San Nicolas said Blas made a very ignorant statement when he commented that the Northern Mariana Islands wasn't asleep at the wheel. First of all, the relief packages that were passed at large for the whole country. The appetite in the Congress was to move relief forward, but there were certain senators, particularly in the Senate, who wanted to ensure the relief was being narrowed to areas of greater need. I suspect that there probably aren't any businesses in Beverly Hills that are going to be eligible for this. You go down to Crenshaw, Watts, maybe so. So I'm going to introduce a term here that I think is helpful in dealing with this. The term is means test. Some government ex gratia payments just come to you because of who you are, how old you are, what service you gave to the country, etc. Social Security. If even you could be Bill Gates, and if you've worked 10 years on Social Security and paid FICA or self-employment time tax the whole time, when you're 62, you could start drawing your Social Security annuity on top of the billions of dollars that you're already raking in. There's no means test for Social Security or for VA benefits or for some of the other things that the government provides. When you're talking in terms of welfare, aid for dependent children, food stamps, etc., there is a means test, which means that only people below a certain income threshold are eligible for those government benefits. So I think what we're looking here, what I gathered from looking at this scheme here, is that we have a geographic means test. How do we know who has how much money? Because as San Nicolas points out, they probably don't want to make Microsoft eligible for any of this money, or Apple, or what's his name, Elon Musk, or any of these other guys. So now it used to be when the census was conducted, they just went around and said, and the census report read, 415 East Geneva Street, 4 noses in there, and that was it. They counted noses, and that was it. But now, you know, they want to know how many people and how many cars and how many cylinders in your car and how many internet, on and on and on and on. So they know pretty much what your income is through the census process. So the last census for which data was complete was 2010. So in order to craft a means test, what the U.S. Congress apparently did was take that census data and say that communities that come within a certain criteria on that census data will be eligible for this program. So where does that geographic means test apply? Well, it probably applies in Madison, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee, and Miami, Florida, Manhattan, and even during our halftime break. But we'll come back after the break just to make sure.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The bill to expand the U.S. Supreme Court, I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News, will be introduced in the morning by a group of Democrat lawmakers. They'll propose increasing the number of justices by 4. Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan telling Fox's Hannity the Democrats want control.
They're going to go from 9 to 13 on the court. That's what the bill says. Imagine if we went the other direction. We said we're going to take it from 9 to 5. We're going to keep Thomas. We're going to keep Alito. We'll keep Gorsuch. We'll keep Kavanaugh. We'll keep Coney Barrett. But we're going to get rid of Roberts and Sotomayor and Kagan and Breyer. Could you imagine what they would say if we tried that? But that's exactly what they're going to try to do.
The Constitution does not specify how many justices should serve on the court. The number has been 9 for more than 150 years. Conservative justices currently holding the majority. President Biden confirming yesterday the withdrawal of U.S. forces in Afghanistan will begin in about 2 weeks and will wrap up by September 11th, but with a warning.
The Taliban should know that if they attack us as we draw down, we will defend ourselves and our partners with all the tools at our disposal.
Several members of Congress calling the pullout a bad decision, including Florida Republican Michael Waltz telling Fox's The Story with Martha McCallum.
The intelligence community is very clear they intend to hit us again. This is repeating Obama in Iraq all over again, but it's worse.
Another night of protests in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota over the Dante Wright shooting. When projectiles started flying at them, police put a stop to it.
We decided to move in after dispersal orders, and we were very thankful that there was not a strong entrenchment mentality of the people that were there at the event. And so the group largely scattered.
But Colonel Matt Langer of the Minnesota State Patrol says 24 protesters were arrested. Also arrested, former police officer Kim Potter after being charged with second-degree manslaughter in the fatal shooting during a traffic stop. She's since been freed on bond. America is listening to Fox News.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
The vaccine is officially here, and we aren't just talking about the COVID vaccine, but a financial vaccine at Bank Pacific. We may not be doctors, but we can help you with your financial health. Whether to take advantage of today's crazy low rates, or just a local bank that has your back. At Bank Pacific, we want to help make 2021 your best year yet. Because for 66 years, where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender. Member FDIC.
In the murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, a defense witness contradicting the prosecution's theory on the cause of George Floyd's death.
Dr. David Fowler, a pathologist, says there was no bruising on George Floyd's neck or back or surrounding tissues.
It speaks to the amount of force that was applied to Mr. Floyd was less than enough to bruise him.
That to prove the state's case that Derek Chauvin used too much force, there should have been bruising. That combined with Floyd's health conditions and possible carbon monoxide poisoning and stress involved in the arrest.
Was adding adrenaline to this whole mixture, making things even worse.
The defense also showing images of Floyd with a white object in his mouth as police arrived that it says is consistent with Floyd's partially consumed opioids found in the back of the police car. The case could go to the jury as early as next week. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
The Navy has decommissioned the USS Bonhomme Richard 9 months after flames engulfed it in one of the worst U.S. warship fires outside of combat. The ship burned for days while undergoing refurbishment in San Diego, leaving it with extensive structural damage. The Richard will be towed to a shipyard in Texas to be dismantled. A Chicago White Sox pitcher barely missing perfection last night.
Rodon rolls into the history books.
Rodon to third. Moncada. Carlos Rodon has thrown a no-hitter.
Call courtesy of NBC Sports Chicago. Carlos Rodon gets Jordan Luplow to ground out to third to lock up his first career no-hitter as the Chicago White Sox down the Cleveland Indians 8-0 Wednesday. Rodon taking a perfect game into the ninth until hitting Roberto Perez with a pitch. He'll have to settle for the second no-hitter for the White Sox in as many years and the 20th all-time for the franchise. It's also the second no-hitter of this MLB season. San Diego Padres pitcher Joe Musgrove tossed a no-no just last Friday. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. If you are a small business, you may be interested in a federal program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This program can provide federal funds to match equity investments into your company or help you get lower interest rates at local banks. To find out more on how this program can help your small business, please contact your Guam Congressional Office at 475-6453 or at michael.stnicholas@mail.house.gov.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the Office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Chili's is bringing you a full meal offer with 3 for me for just $15. You get a beverage, a starter, and an entree. First, choose from a refreshing Coca-Cola or iced tea, pick a starter, then select your choice of a mouth-watering entree, like Cajun pasta with grilled chicken, ranchero chicken tacos, or the savory Santa Fe burger. Dine in today or visit chilisguam.com for delivery and to-go options. Chili's, 3 for me for just $15. Available for a limited time. Chili's, savor the moment.
Okay, so here we go after that big halftime show on Tall Tales. So we go from football right back to boxing. And that's Kid San Nicolas versus Blaster Bloss. And I was explaining here about this map. I will show you once again. that divides the area into eligible and ineligible areas, drives the island into eligible and ineligible areas based on poverty determinations made in the 2010 census. And and Senator Frank Blas Jr. saw this and said, oh, this is, what did he say? It's, let me go back here. It's discriminatory. My initial reaction to the utilization of a map to determine eligibility was it was unnecessary, etc. The words that I can use to describe it are nonsense and discriminatory.
The colors clash.
Yeah, they should have had someone with the proper palette to daub the colors in. So I'm going to go through the rest of San Nicolas's explanation here, but this is a nationwide program. And from what I've read, I can see the sense of it, that you don't want to provide this economic injury disaster loan targeted advance and business loan program. You don't want to make this cheap money available in areas where people have been thriving through the pandemic. You want to give it to low-income areas. That's called a means test. And so in Chicago, maybe there'd be businesses on the south side that would be eligible. Michigan Avenue, not so much. And the way these things work, sometimes the boundary between one zone and another is a street. We weren't really familiar with that in the United States until the Supreme Court came along and said that for the one man and one vote rules, we used to divide states, the 50 states, up by using easily discernible lines, county lines, city boundaries, etc. But if you're gonna do one man, one vote, sometimes you have to ignore those boundaries. So sometimes 1/4 of the city will be represented by this congressman, the other 3/4 by that congressman. It's not silly, it's not discriminatory. It's sometimes the way things work out. So San Nicolas goes on to explain the appetite in Congress was to move relief forward, but there were certain senators, and he says, particularly in the Senate. I suspect this didn't apply to any of the senators in the House of Representatives. Yeah, he says there were certain senators, particularly in the Senate, who wanted to ensure the relief was being narrowed for areas of greater need. Responding to the congressman, Blas said he didn't believe there was ignorance in trying to obtain answers. This program has been in place for well over 30 days, and if there's any ignorance, it's in the fact that not being able to inform the community, at least those businesses that are going to be adversely affected, Blas said. The senator said he's received calls from business owners who were not just surprised, but felt betrayed and angered. Well, nowadays, if you can't be angry about something, you really have absolutely nothing to say in this era of grievance politics. They felt betrayed and angered because they were waiting for EIDL assistance only to learn they do not qualify based on their location. Eligible companies were entitled to a maximum of $10,000 in benefits under the initial EIDL, but funding constraints resulted in many applicants not receiving a full award. The program was revived in the American Rescue Plan, which allows businesses to obtain their remaining amount. But a new prerequisite mandates that a company be located in a low-income community. However, these communities were determined using 2010 census data. In Tamuning, a designated low-income area is bordered by Fahrenhold in the north, Carlos Camacho Road in the west, Marine Corps Drive in the south, and challenge San Antonio in the east. Now I'm going to try to translate that into names that you probably remember. Hospital Road in the east, Camp Watkins Road in the west, Marine Corps Drive in the south, Fahrenholt in the north. Changing these names is easy, but it doesn't work very well. This can mean that two businesses equally affected by the pandemic will be treated differently. Here we go, Jose. Simply based on what side of the street they are located. Simply, yeah. Bloss wrote to San Nicolas about the matter on Monday. While it is my understanding that the map used was generated from census data collected in 2010, how is it surmised that the pandemic affected businesses on just one side of the street as opposed to the other? Well, if you listen to my little chat about means testing, that isn't what it meant. It meant those on one side of the street meant the means test, those on the other side didn't. Now, maybe you don't like the means test, but if you're going to bitch about something, you kind of got to know what it is that you're bitching about. It went on to say, meanwhile, essentially all of Saipan, Tinian and Rhoda are considered low income according to the policy map. So the CNMI is not facing the same issue. Lucky CNMI, a lot more people up there, poor people up there. And this kind of reminds me of, the tax advice that old people really don't want to hear. If you're 65 or older, you get an extra large exemption. And then if you're blind, you get another exemption. So when you sum it all up, if you're 65 and blind, you really got it made.
Well, if that's what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, if you're striving for something. So the CNMI has really got it made because all of their areas are low-income areas. So that it's something for us to work on, I guess.
Somehow, I don't feel like going there.
Yeah. Simply looking at it that way doesn't give you a very good answer. Meanwhile, etc., while he didn't know the exact person behind the difference between Guam and the CNMI, Bloss told the Post Monday it would be safe to assume the CNMI wasn't asleep at the wheel. So when this matter was going through the Senate, Kelly Lee was out there right on the Senate floor raising his hand and saying, hey, make sure you include the CN, because we got a lot of poor folks up there in the CNMI.
I would have waved a sign, but we can't afford one.
Yeah. On Tuesday, San Nicolas said the reason CNMI was largely considered low income is because they had a poverty rate of 52% in the 2010 census, while Guam had a rate of 22%. Man, those lucky guys up in CNMI. The reason the CNMI did not have the same limitations we do is not because anyone was asleep at the wheel. I think Senator Bloss needs to wake up and realize that. But more importantly, according to San Nicolas, the situation for Guam is unlikely to change. Creating an exemption unique to Guam would be a non-starter, and there would be the possibility that Congress will amend the program as a whole. The current structure was necessary compromise to begin to push out the overall package. Now, this, of course, is fodder for the nationalists to feed upon. Yeah, it's just colonialization. Just because we're a small island, they're not going to change the law. Like they'd change it for Rhode Island or Delaware or Montana.
Tobanga.
Tobanga, yeah. Bloss asked how the situation could be considered a win for businesses ineligible for the IDL benefit on Guam. The last time I checked, COVID hit every part of this island. A case could have been made for our geographic isolation, our economic situation, as opposed to other areas, he added. How do you explain that to the mom and pop store struggling to survive and not eligible to get assistance because of the side of the street they're on. So we have these companies that move houses and move buildings and things like that. So maybe we could start a government program to subsidize the relocation of businesses so they could be eligible for this program.
Like a food truck?
Yeah, right. All right, so much for San Nicolas versus Blas. And is my stack working? Stack is working. I got another Joe. He wants to talk about voting laws and rights.
Off card.
Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about Blas versus San Nicolas. I'll tell you what, another Joe. If I got time at the end of the program, we'll talk about voting laws and rights. Okay, next item on the card is BLM versus Potter. And I've got a squib about the Supreme Court here also. Now, of course, by now the whole country knows that another person was shot by a police officer, was killed by a police officer. And I'm going to give you two different ways of hearing this case or trying this case, right? We've got the social justice way and then the American jurisprudence way. Now, as I understand the facts, from the way the facts have been reported, a driver named Dewante Wright had a warrant out for him for armed robbery. And Mr. Wright was pulled over by a couple of cops, one whose name was Potter, because he had a non-functioning tail light. After they pulled him over, as cops always do, I've been pulled over too many times for speeding, not for armed robbery, right? And what they do is they want to see your driver's license, they want to see your registration. They take them, they excuse themselves, they go back to their car, they get on the radio, and they call their headquarters to find out what's going on with the driver. Are there any outstanding warrants on that driver? And in Wright's case, there were outstanding warrants. So when the cops told him that he was under arrest and told him to get out of the car, he got out and then he got back in. And they were struggling with him. It's kind of like a movie we've already seen once before. So the cops just can't let somebody drive away after they've stopped him and put him under arrest. Without going into a long explanation, certainly deadly force is a likely possibility in that situation. So what was decided was that a taser would be fired at Wright in the car in order to get him to comply with the officers. A cop named Potter reached for her. Well, here's another complication. Cops in Brooklyn Heights, Minnesota. I asked yesterday, why would anybody name their city Brooklyn Heights? Anyhow, the taser's worn on the left, the firearm is worn on the right. So in order to pull the taser, you'd have to do a cross draw. So instead of doing the cross draw and pulling her taser, she reached in her holster, she pulled out her pistol, and she shot Wright. And right after she shot him, she said, "Oh, shucks," with a little different, stronger word. "I shot him." And he died. He drove down the street and then he died. So the next day, Potter was arrested. You see her picture online in an orange jumpsuit. She was arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter. The city manager, when asked what the disposition of Potter would be, and the city manager says every employee of the city of Brooklyn Heights in the disciplinary process is entitled to due process. because of that outrageous statement, he was fired. So that leads me into the first way we'll examine this. Let's examine this using the rules of social justice and critical race theory. Okay, now for critical race theory, the first thing you must identify is, was there an oppressor, and who was the oppressed? And the answer is simple. The oppressor was Potter, the cop. Who was the oppressed? Deshane Wright, because he's an African American. He's a BIPOC. He's a person, he's a black indigenous person of color. So he's obviously the person that's oppressed. So that's all you need to know. What you do when you discover who the oppressed is and who the oppressor is, you punish the oppressor and you reward the oppressed. And not only do you reward the oppressed, you award all others who are in the same category as the oppressed, every other BIPOC in Brooklyn Heights. So once you understand that, you can understand why the city manager had to be fired. There's no room for due process here. It's not what happened that counts, and that's where due process comes in. Due process law means that anybody who's faced with a tribunal that might cost him his life, liberty, or property is entitled to notice of the charges against him, time to prepare, usually an impartial decision maker, and certain other things that are usually pretty well spelled out in law. That's what due process means. But you don't need due process when a white person shoots a black person. That's superfluous. There's a name for that thought process. You know what it is, Jose? White supremacy. Because what you are doing is you are tying the oppressed to a system created by whites to suppress BIPOCs. So it's classic white supremacy. So the critical race theory, it looks like we've begun to reach the right result. We arrested her, which is okay. We fired the city manager for such heretical thinking as thinking that anybody would be entitled to due process before before they would lose their jobs. Then we go on to the social justice theory of jurisprudence. And the social justice theory of jurisprudence picks up critical race theory and then takes it to the next step. And the next step is that those people in the same class as the oppressed, in other words, BIPOCs, have a license to go out to break into every store they want to and to take whatever they want to from that store. Under ordinary circumstances, this would be called theft and looting. But in this situation, the social justice theory of justice, no, it's reparations. And in the process of doing that, if you want to have a little sport with it, you can start fires and you can cause a riot and you can throw things at police officers, because after all, it was a police officer that shot Wright. So that's the social justice theory. Now, there's another theory that is becoming less and less popular as time goes on. The theories that I mentioned bear a great similarity to what those who are really caught up in critical race theory will advance at the drop of a hat, and that is lynching. When the majority knows what happened, they don't need no stinking due process. They just go out and do what needs to be done. So let's turn now to the way we used to do things and the way we might get back to doing them, although as time goes on, it becomes more and more doubtful. I've got a column from my favorite, Jonathan Turley. And you know, Jonathan Turley is a straight shooter. He voted for Hillary. He is very objective. He calls them as he sees them. He's a good writer, very knowledgeable, and he knows what he's talking about. Now, of course, according to the first two theories that I mentioned, the critical race theory of justice and the social justice theory of justice, they would not entertain Jonathan Turley for 2 minutes. You know why, Jose?
Why?
He's white.
Ooh.
Yeah.
How dare he?
Yeah. Well, so anything he says is easily categorized as white supremacy. But this is what he says. Minnesota is once more reeling from an all too familiar pattern of a police shooting leading to protests and riots. The shooting of Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center on Sunday was a horror shown in a continual slow-motion loop on every news channel. Much remains unknown about this seemingly senseless killing. Finding those answers takes faith and fealty to the legal system. See what I mean? Faith and fealty? No. Application of critical race theory is what it needs. Faith and fealty to the legal system that's based on fairness and due process. However, many political leaders have again decided that due process is a liability. When Brooklyn Center City Manager Kurt Bogany said a full investigation would be conducted and due process afforded to any accused officers, he was fired. Soon after the shooting and before any underlying facts were established, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz denounced, quote, another life of a black man taken by law enforcement. That's your governor up there, Minnesota. And made a connection to the trial of police officer Derek Chauvin occurring a few miles away. If we haven't tainted the jury process enough already, we got another shot at it. Due process is not a dirty word or a dog whistle. Bogany was trying to do what Walz was unwilling to do and respect the rule of law. Boy, this is old-fashioned stuff, isn't it? If I were to give a lecture like this in half or probably 90% of the colleges in the United States, they'd be throwing rotten tomatoes at me. Due process, respect for the rule of law, where did you come from? When reporters asked Bogany if he would fire the officers involved with the shooting, he stated, if I were to answer that question, I would be contradicting what I said a moment ago, which is to say that all employees are entitled to due process, and after due process, discipline will be determined. If I were to say anything else, I would be contradicting the very idea of due process. Officials showed this contradiction he feared by firing him. It is possible that the shooting was accidental. In the video, the officer is heard yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," before she swears and says, "Holy shucks, I just shot him." We have seen many cases of officers confusing tasers with service weapons in struggles. There have been design and training changes to address these tragedies. The shape and color of tasers were changed to reduce the weapon confusion incidents. Although some departments have experimented with different tasers, most still believe tasers shaped like guns offer the best tactical use. They have tried training, utility belt placement, and other means to avoid weapon confusion. But in a dangerous, adrenaline-driven encounters, split-second mistakes still occur. One of the most infamous cases of weapon confusion occurred in 2009. Oscar Grant was on ground in a prone position when the Bay Area Rapid Transit officer, Johannes Mercerly, told colleagues he was going to taser him. Mercerly then shot Grant in the back with a service weapon. He was later found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. There was a TV movie made about that, something with flowers in the name that named that BART stop. It'll come to me in a minute. Probably one of our posters will come up with it. Okay, so time for the seventh inning stretch, and I've got another Joe. Well, I've got Frenchie and another Fred waiting to talk about the three theories of justice. I'm going to finish this up, and then I'll get to you, Frenchie, Fred, and then another Joe when we get to Churchill Downs.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Sunday brunch at Mezcla Bistro in Hagåtña is back.
Come and enjoy Mezcla's true taste of Guam.
At only $28.95, enjoy your Sunday with your friends and family with their free-flowing house mimosa or house draft beer. Open for 2 seatings at 10:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m.
Let Mezcla serve up your favorite local foods. Call them at 479-2652
or 479-2653 to book a reservation. Limited seating available.
Mezcla reminds everyone to be safe and stay sanitized. Sunday brunch at Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Seventh inning stretch here at Wrigley Field, and we're going to take a trip to Oakland instead of back here. The movie that I was thinking of was called Fruit Valley Station. It's worth watching on TV, and it's an incident like this. And of course, all of the decedent's relatives thought that it was murder or racism or something like that. That was an easier one probably to deal with than the one we're dealing with now, which I'm going to jump back into. Weapon confusion research often discusses the work of psychologist Alphonse Champanis, who was called by the military to look at the problem of pilots retracting their landing gear after landing their bombers. Despite pilots being court-martialed for the mistake, he found that the levers for the landing gear and flaps were not only identical but located near each other. The shooting of Grant marks the same problem. The video showed Mercer moving his thumb over his weapon. His service weapon did not have a thumb safety, but his taser did. This was evidence that Mercer thought he pulled the taser before firing the fatal round. He thought he was unlocking the safety. These weapons confusion cases are all tragic and all involve all races and genders. In many cases, the use of tasers would have been deemed reasonable. The same may be true in the incident with Wright, who was shown resisting arrest and attempting to flee. Most jurisdictions would consider use of a taser to be warranted, although doing that would be dangerous in a situation with someone who is driving a vehicle or might be deemed excessive during a minor traffic stop. That brings us back to due process. We do not know yet if use of a taser could be viewed as reasonable or a weapon confusion was involved with Brooklyn Center Police. Police Chief Tim Gannon denied news reports that Wright was stopped for having too many air fresheners hanging from his rearview mirror. Gannon insisted the stop was based on expired license plates, but concerns remain about the possibility of racial profiling. The impact could also be felt in Minneapolis. Some of us voiced concern over the trial court decision to try Chauvin in the same city where George Floyd was killed and riots raged. So today, new riots are happening after another death of an African American under dubious circumstances, and the trial judge has refused to move and protect the jury from prejudicial news coverage of the Brooklyn Center shooting incident. How do you spell reversible error? Political leaders in Minneapolis have acted in ways which could prejudice the Chauvin trial. They have referred to the death of Floyd as a murder, etc. Now let's get back to the shooting of Wright. Politicians again are discarding restraint. Representative Rashida Tlaib declared that this was, quote, not an accident, and decried, quote, policing in our country as intentionally racist and government-funded murder. Now, this is a representative from Michigan in the House of Representatives, a congressperson. St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter said, it comes at a hard time because we're still mourning George Floyd and we're still waiting for justice for George Floyd. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey denounced the cruelty of an officer-involved shooting while we're simultaneously adjudicating at trial yet another officer killing. And then, of course, we've got AOC, who declared on Twitter that this was not a random, disconnected accident. It was the repeated outcome of an indefensible system that grants impunity for state violence. Bogany shows that defending due process is now a precarious choice in these times, one few politicians are willing to make. The contradictions he sought to avoid are the rallying cries of those in power. Unfortunately, just as due process once defended us before, the disregard of due process now may define us in these tragedies. We can grieve such losses and demand answers without presuming facts or prejudicing cases. So that's Jonathan Turley. And got a little bit more here. The former Minnesota police officer has been arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter in the shooting of Daunte Wright. The charge allows up to 10 years, and this is more Turley, up to 10 years in prison, but it also has a standard that could prove challenging in the prosecution. There is evidence that shooting of Wright was a case of, quote, weapon confusion, and Potter firing what she thought was her taser. The case is very similar to Oscar Grant's shooting discussed in my earlier column. Here's the Minnesota law. A person who causes the death of another by any of the following means is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree and may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 10 years or payment of a fine of not more than 20 grand. 1, causes death to another by the person's culpable negligence, whereby the person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm to another. Doesn't sound like that. 2, by shooting another with a firearm or other dangerous weapon as a result of negligently believing the other to be a deer. Remember, this is Minnesota now. A deer or other animal. Well, that's not it. 3, by setting a spring gun, pitfall, deadfall. No, it's not that. 4, by negligently or intentionally permitting any animal. It's not that. 5, by committing or attempting to commit a violation of Section 609.378, negligent endangerment of a child. It's not that. So those are the 5 definitions for second-degree manslaughter in Minnesota. Turley goes on to say, obviously, this case will turn on the first provision and whether Potter created an unreasonable risk and consciously took chances of causing death or great bodily injury to another. This would be like shooting your pistol in the air on New Year's Eve and the round comes down and kills somebody. That would be negligent homicide. In the video, Potter is heard yelling, taser, 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 before she swears and says, holy shucks, I just shot him. We have seen many cases of officers confusing tasers with service weapons in struggles. The question is whether such a split-second error constitutes consciously taking chances of causing death. In the Grant case, the jury rejected more serious charges in favor of involuntary manslaughter. The Minnesota Supreme Court previously ruled the statute requires proof of an objective element and a subjective element, the objective element being gross negligence and the subjective element being recklessness in the form of an actual conscious disregard of the risk created by the conduct. This interpretation is based on the wording of the statute itself, etc. So, once again, I'm going to read the definition. The prosecution is going to have to prove. They're going to have to prove that Officer Potter created an unreasonable risk, pulling somebody over for an expired plate, attempting to taser that person after she found out that he was an armed robber and was trying to escape, unreasonable risk, and consciously takes chances of causing great death or bodily injury. Well, I suspect, again, the training of Minneapolis police officers would be, in a situation like this, use your taser. So if we apply the third type of justice, remember I started out with critical race theory justice, second, social justice theory of justice, and either one of those, I don't know if they still hang people in Minnesota or not, but that's the way it ought to come out. And of course, either one of those theories of justice, regardless, even before the trial starts, it requires merchants to maintain an open door policy for looters, and fires, arson, and rioting are fair game. Now, the third theory of justice, which is kind of the old-fashioned way that we kind of been proud of doing for a long, long time. We've often been heard to say that, it's better to let 100 guilty men go free than to hang one innocent man. We've turned that inside out now, depending on what color the guilty man is. It's better to let 100, anyhow. So if this goes according to the law, there's not going to be anything left of Minneapolis, because those who favor the critical race theory and the social justice theory and all of their aiders and abettors like Tlaib, the mayor, the governor, AOC, are going to insist that town be leveled, because it can't. It's kind of like the old thing in Vietnam. In order to save the village, we had to destroy it. So when I see things like this, and the reason I'm spending a lot of time on this is extremely serious. It hasn't hit us yet. It hasn't affected us yet. But our country is on the way to a tipping point that we'll never be able to recover from. We are very close to that now. And it's the radical left, it's the critical race theory guy, and all of the dupes that have been sucked into this. Are you listening? Coca-Cola, Major League Baseball, Tom Shea, Mariana Leon Guerrero, etc. Oh yeah, I'm for racial justice. Well, good, let's burn down your house. Well, I'm not that in favor of it. Okay, let's see what we've got going on here. I've got a full green room. So I've got Frenchie, another Jed, and then I suppose we're going to catch him at supper time. That would be Drive-Through Jack. So let's go to Churchill Downs, and I'll start out with Frenchie.
Listen to The Point. Any speaker, anytime. Check us out on your FM radio at 93.3, 104.3 HD3, thepoint.gu, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and tune in. And announcing radio.com. Download the app and hear The Point. Get the latest news, sports, entertainment, and more. On demand. Your phone is digital. Your life is digital. And we are too. 93.3, The Point.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Okay, so here we are heading down the home stretch at Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm going to call on Frenchie to help me get up on my horse here at the starting gate. Good afternoon, Frenchie.
Yeah, let's not forget the saddle. So we're too old to ride without a saddle.
True.
So anyway, to answer your call, I think you asked about 3 times in the last week about rapporteur, which comes from the verb rapporter, which means to bring back. So it's the person that brings back either something. In the case of a dog, it would be a retriever. And in the case of things, that can be a report or whatever. So to continue on what you were saying, we are, like you say, at a tipping point, and it's because the people that have won the elections, they have decided to continue in dividing to rule. And they are doing it with keeping the border open. And of course, last week, the elected president, pushed his gun control agenda. And as we know, journalists and politicians on the left know nothing about gun, but that doesn't stop them from pushing gun control. They always come up with blanket statements like saying, we don't want rifles, assault rifle, because they can shoot hundreds of rounds in a minute, even though you have to change a 32-shot magazine several times in order to do that. And it's not an automatic, it's a semi-auto, but it doesn't matter. It's all about the narrative. And the narrative since January 6th was white supremacy is on the rise. Mass shootings are done mostly by white supremacist Christian zealots, even though it doesn't fit the reality, because the last few mass shootings that we've seen, one was done by a Muslim Syrian refugee who went on a rampage in a kosher store. And, of course, nobody talks about that. Was that a hate crime against Jews? We don't know. And the other one was a sexual addict who shot not only Asian, but also white people and Latinos. So, and it doesn't fit the thing, but it doesn't stop them from continuing the narrative. And as you said, depending on who is doing the shooting and who is shot, you have different approach. We remember that on January 6th, the only person that died from violence during the quote-unquote uprising was this lady called Babbitt, who ended up being shot at point blank by what we now know was a Capitol Police officer, actually a lieutenant. And to this day, DOJ refused to file charges against that police officer, even though he was not in imminent danger, and he did not need to fire his weapon at point blank in somebody that was not armed or showing aggressiveness. And we all also know that the officer is a lieutenant of the Capitol Police, and he's a black male, and his name is David Bailey, even though the media doesn't want to let us know. And probably the family will have to, the only recourse they will have will be a civil lawsuit, which is good luck with that in D.C. with 90% of the population being black. So it's very interesting that, it contrasts exactly with what you were just talking about in Minnesota. Another attack on Camp Pelosi, like the National Guards call it, was done by, at first they say, oh, it must be a white supremacist. Well, lack of luck, it was a black member of the Nation of Islam, who is a separatist, racist, black supremacist movement. So it's the exact opposite of the narrative. And that is always going on. So besides that, we have, why do they push all those false narratives? And it's evident that when you see the national statistic on crimes, most of the crimes are done with illegal handguns, and it's done by gangbangers. But at the same time, we know that cities in New York, in Boston, in New Jersey, in the Twin Cities, in Minnesota, in Chicago, in LA, in San Francisco, on Portland, Seattle, St. Louis, they keep releasing criminals with gun that have been charged with gun charges, and those people usually never see a cell. They are released on the street to commit more murders, and it is mind-boggling. But then those are the same city that are allowing illegal immigrants to get driver license and everything in their own things. So we have two weights and two measures. Then at the same time, we have Hunter Biden, who commits perjury to get a handgun on a federal file, and we're still waiting for him to be prosecuted. And what we see on the street of Minneapolis, basically, let's call it Hennepin County, because now it's also in Brooklyn Center. You have terroristic threats by the BLM and Antifa, who are armed militias of the DNC, just like the KKK used to be an armed militia of the DNC. And basically they change the color of the terrorists, but they are still terrorists. And you have one of the two major parties in this country that is using physical intimidation against the judiciary system. And it's very, very dangerous. And we've seen so far that what's his name, Chauvin in Minneapolis, is basically facing a lot of charges. Half of them would be hard to prove, but the judge, who I happen to know as a rabid liberal, is basically presiding over a kangaroo court. So what's going to happen there, I don't know. And then this Brooklyn Center issue. Brooklyn Center is an interesting, if you know the Twin City area and you look at the freeways, it looks like a huge rectangle around the Twin Cities. You have Highway 94, which goes from Chicago to Seattle and goes through your neck of the wood, I think, in Wisconsin.
It does.
And then splits in, I think it's in Wisconsin Dells. It splits into 94 and 90 going south, 94 going north.
That'd be Toma.
One in the horizon. Hello?
Toma, Wisconsin.
Yeah, Toma. Yeah, you're right, which is after Wisconsin then.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically, makes a huge rectangle around the Twin Cities, and Brooklyn Center, which is south of Brooklyn Park, it's still part of Hennepin County. It's kind of a trapeze based around a commercial center called Brooklyn Center. And it's a small town. It used to be blue-collar white until about 10 years ago. Now it's 83% black. And it's mostly people coming from Michigan and Chicago. And you have a total change of the ethnicity of people in Hennepin County. You've had a huge influx of Somalis. You have a huge influx of people from both Michigan and Illinois, because Minnesota is very, very free giving in their social programs. And so you have a kid 20 years old that is being portrayed as an innocent guy, but he's actually had his bail revoked because he was caught carrying a handgun while he was on bail. So, and resisted arrest and ended up being shot, which apparently looks by accident. I guess the court will let us know later on. But, you know, Minneapolis is Hennepin County. St. Paul is, I think it's Ramsey. And I guess Father Hennepin, who the county was named after, is probably turning in his grave, seeing what's happening in his county.
Hey, Frenchie,
yeah.
On the subject of names, what was that guy's name? David what?
David.
The one that shot the lady at the Capitol?
Oh, let me... I have
the Capitol policeman.
Yeah, David Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y. He's a black lieutenant of the Capitol Police Force.
Okay.
Yeah, black. It's on the internet, and the family lawyer of Babbitt released the name, even though the DOJ has refused to do so far. But then the police officer that's just involved in that accidental shooting, she lives in Champlain, which is north and in a different county, north of Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. They had to build a fence around her house.
Hey, Frenchie, we gotta go.
Yeah.
And,
so what we have now, we have the rule of mobs versus the rule of law, basically.
Right. So our Fred and Drive-Through Jack will put this on the card tomorrow. So I'd really like to have you call back tomorrow. Okay. That's it for another day. Thank you, Frenchie.
Sure.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Move to expand the courts. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Congressional Democrats writing legislation to increase the size of the Supreme Court.
Senator Ed Markey and several Democratic House members say they'll be introducing a measure to bring on board more justices to the high court. That would let President Biden appoint more liberal justices and override the conservative majority the court has now. The president has said he's against packing the court, but he did issue an executive order a few days ago to create a commission to look at possible Supreme Court reforms. The Constitution doesn't dictate how many Supreme Court justices there should be.
Fox's Jill Nato. Public outcry stopped President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's plan to expand the court in 1937. Another night of protests in suburban Minneapolis. Police responding quickly as some in the crowd started throwing things at them.
Troopers calling this an encirclement. Essentially, they have corralled all of the people who were at the center of the demonstrations, and they moved in from both sides, arresting anyone they could get their hands on, ordering a lot of people on the ground. But it also had the effect of scattering the demonstrators who were there.
Fox's Mike Tobin. 24 protesters were arrested. Former police officer Kim Potter has a preliminary hearing in court today. She's charged with second-degree manslaughter for Dante Wright's death, firing her service revolver when she meant to tase him during Sunday's traffic stop. She's now free on bond.